Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coast to Coast. It's been a little while, but we're back for the new financial new year. My name's Lou McCurry. I'm one of the compliance technology specialists here at Microsoft, based in Melbourne. And joining me is Bo Fall. Bo, how are you, buddy?
Going well, Lou. So for those that don't know me, I am Bo Fall. I'm a technology specialist for Microsoft based out of Perth, Western Australia, looking after our Purview solutions. So this week, I guess this month really, on Coast to Coast, we've decided we're going to look at introducing a new series that we've been working on. So we know that everyone likes demos. We've realized that we haven't really given Purview like a comprehensive viewing on what's in it, how it works, and show off how those capabilities kind of interact with each other. So with this series, we're aiming to close that knowledge gap on the Purview suite. We have it planned out to cover all the different capabilities available. So we hope it will help educate people and get across just how comprehensive the solution actually is. Each month, we're looking to do a different capability. We're going to demonstrate how it works, walk through some use cases for it. Today is going to be a bit more about information protection and kind of giving you a holistic overview on what we're trying to achieve. So hopefully that's going to be valuable, and then you stick with us through that journey moving forward.
It's going to be a Demopalooza. And
it is.
I'm a bit of a visual learner myself too. So the intention is also to show a bit of user experience, but also the admin console. How do we build out those experiences?
100%. And like we've been speaking about this a couple of other times, we'll go into slides and stuff and just briefly walk through in a second. But I think there's still that comprehensive misunderstanding that people assume Purview is purely a compliance or regulatory compliance solution, whereas a lot of the capabilities are primarily focused around things like data security. And I'll walk through that in a second as well, just to highlight the differences there. So with that, I'll cover some news really briefly. There's only a couple of little key items I want to tick off before we actually kick in to the session. So there's been a refresh of our security documentation page on Microsoft Learn. So you can use that as the jumping off point for any of our security skilling content. And that covers both the Purview stuff and the security stack. I will put a link of that in the show description below. And the other thing I saw that have come through recently that's pretty cool is we're making some changes to our auto labeling scoping on OneDrive, right? So it's currently in preview, but previously you'd have to only be able to scope it to like site URLs. But now we're changing it so that you can scope it to users and groups instead. So that's a big difference in the portal.
Awesome. Always like a bit of news.
Changes it up, right?
Yeah. Now you promised a bit of slideware.
I did. It's not going to be too much slideware, okay. I promise. It's like 4 slides.
There's a place for PowerPoint.
Yeah, there is. Not in a Demopalooza, but we'll kick it off from there. So let me bring this up now. Just want to briefly talk at like a high level as to how we view Purview and the kind of approach that we take to it. So if we start talking about Purview, we want to start speaking about it in that defense and depth approach, right? There's not going to be a single solution in the entire stack for any vendor, for any technology, for anyone that's going to give you full comprehensive security in the one product. It's not how it works. We're looking at providing a defense and depth approach so we can work through the different stages. So we want to first discover your data to make sure we know where that data exists and what data we're looking for. We want to protect and govern the data with things like information protection and record labels to make sure that we're encrypting, safeguarding that data, preventing it from being deleted before it should, managing its life cycle. We want to manage the risks on that data. And that's when we start talking about things like inside risk management, where we're looking at the telemetry from users to see how they're interacting and using that data to prevent those sorts of risks as well. And we also want to prevent the loss of that data, the tools like data loss prevention. So if we have sensitive information, even if it's encrypted and we're protecting it, we want to stop that data from being potentially exfiltrated, moved out of the organization and used for malicious purposes. That can cover both malicious actors and accidental ones. There's too often that we hear that people have accidentally shared sensitive data. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it's for, and it happens all the time. So as you can see here, we've got that comprehensive approach, and we're going to talk through this over the next couple of months when we're walking through it. But we've got that data governance side of things, which is some of the Azure consumption side, where we're looking at like the data catalog. We've got insider risks that we spoke about before, and that also includes communications compliance. We've got data loss prevention, and that extends to things like the endpoints, your 365 environments, Teams, SharePoint, those different locations. And obviously what we speak about today, a little bit about information protection. So encrypting that content, making sure it's got markings on it so people know what it's for feeding those sort of things into the other components in Purview as well to have that defense in depth approach. As you can see here, we're talking about information protection today. So sensitivity labels, that side of thing. We can see that we've got a bunch of different ways that we can build out, such as the data classification service, which is where we're looking for that information. We can use sensitive information types. We've got built-in ones or your custom. We've got named identities, exact data matching. We've got trainable classifiers. Lou will speak about this a little bit more when we get into the actual demo, but you can see that they translate into what we call sensitivity labels. So once we've found what this content is, let's say credit cards, for example, we can say, let's put a confidential label onto it. That label applies encryption for specific users and groups within your organization. And we can extend that out to Defender for cloud apps. We can extend it out to on-premise. We can extend it out into the data governance side of things, SQL databases, Azure storage locations, AWS S3 instances. We can extend it out there. We can also extend that out to obviously 365. We can use those sensitive information types in things like endpoint DLP, Power BI, Teams, SharePoint Exchange. We can extend those out to those different solutions. It also feeds into a bunch of other things like Insider Risk Management Engine, communications compliance. We can extend them out into Microsoft Priva. They're used as like a fundamental building block across the entire platform, the entire service.
Hey, Bo, just on this slide, the thing to point out is that what we're looking at here aren't sort of separate point solutions. When we talk about Purview sort of collectively as that solution family set, we're actually looking at completely integrated solution set here that just collectively works with each other. And the layout of this slide is quite deliberate, where in the middle there you've got that data classification service that all the solutions on the outside tap into. So there's real efficiencies here in the fact that you're running on a single platform. This is all running on your tenant for the most part, actually pretty much for everything with the exception of on premises. There's no infrastructure requirements here. This is all activation in the cloud, right?
Exactly. And even if we start talking about things like endpoint DLP, it's agentless. It's built into Windows. You're not managing 300 agents to get this solution up. You're not slowing down your devices. It's all done. It's all baked in. You're not needing to spend a whole bunch of engineering hours to connect these things together to feed that telemetry. Even when we speak about, let's say, Insider Risk, there's a native connector where we can just plug that straight into Sentinel. It takes like 3 clicks. Then all that telemetry that you're getting within Insider Risk, that's correlating all of the stuff within M365, put it in a Sentinel, correlate that against the security stack. You have a whole wealth of information you can build from.
Awesome.
When we start speaking a little bit about sensitivity labels, and this is just to give you a really high level before Lou goes into the demo, they're a representation of your information taxonomy. So think of the classification of your data. You might have public, sensitive, highly confidential. It depends what your organization is and what your data classification levels are. You can map those against different controls. So we can do things like protection. So visual markings might have a watermark or a header or a footer on a document to represent what that sensitivity level is. We can do encryption. So maybe I might say everyone in my organization can read these documents that are marked as confidential, for example. Maybe there's only a specific user or specific groups of users that could make changes, that could print, that could make other settings into those documents. And Lou will walk you through that shortly as well.
Yeah.
In terms of...
Oh, sorry, mate.
The last thing I was touching on there was the last thing in there is kind of the automation of it. So when we spoke about those sensitive information types before, credit cards, personal information, things like that, we can have the system that once it's detected that information, automatically apply a label to it. There's 2 sort of key ways. We've got content labels, and that's for documents, stuff like that, data that way as well. And we've got container labels, and that's where we start managing the privacy and the guest sharing of that information. Things like SharePoint sites, Teams channels, things like that. You can see a pretty clear delineation of that here. And I'll flick back to you for a sec, Lou. You can say what you were going to say while I get that last slide up.
You've actually made the point I was going to, and that is that there's, if you've been around these solutions for a little while, you're probably familiar with what we now call content labels, markings on documents and emails. The concept of container labels might be new to you, so we're going to cover some of that off now as well. And what a beautiful segue that is, as I share my screen, Bo, and transition across to
Demopalooza.
It's Demopalooza. We need a bit of a sting for this bit.
We'll make one. It's early. We're in flight.
In the meantime, I'm just going to keep saying it. Demopalooza. We'll do it that way. I'm keeping this in too. So what we're looking at here, and as I mentioned earlier, the intention with all these sessions and the subsequent ones as well, and it won't just be me demoing, so don't panic, everyone. But it's as much as possible, show you the user experience of what we're talking about, then flip over to the admin consoles and have a look at how that user experience was built. And without going down too many rabbit holes, just walk us through some scenarios. So in this case, you're looking at the desktop of one of my demo users. His name is Isaiah Langer. You'll get to know him very well. He's a member of something called the Mark 8 project team in this little environment. Within that Mark 8 project, there is a research and development part of the project, and everything within R&D is highly confidential, of course, for all the reasons you would expect, in terms of intellectual property and competitive edge and all those sorts of reasons. So substitute this scenario for anything you need. So in terms of, we've got our intellectual property for our organization, which is always important, but within that, there's the crown jewels, which are super important, and we may need to treat that differently as well. So here I am in this environment, and I'm on my Windows desktop here, and the first thing I might do is just talk a little bit about content creation. So, we're working here on a blank document. Here's Isaiah Langer. I'm signed in, and this is my document, and you're going to get used to this kind of amazing touch typing. But the first thing I want to point out is that, from a manual classification point of view, let's make some presumptions here. We're giving all the responsibility and accountability to the end user here. So Isaiah needs to jump up here and have a look at the available sensitivity labels that have been published to him and make the correct choice here. And you can see as I sort of click through, we've got the use of color here. We've got icons that make it really clear with this padlock, hey, this is going to be encrypted, as opposed to public, which is not encrypted, it's just a label. Some of these labels are going to introduce visual markings, some don't. So if I was to jump in here and apply general anyone, we have the sensitivity label applying, as you can see here, but there's no visual markings on the document giving me a sense that anything's changed. In fact, it's a good idea to make something like this the default for every new document, so end users don't need to worry about this stuff. But when they do need to jump up, you can see I'm jumping all the way up to Mark 8 project. The order is important as well, by the way. We're getting more sensitive as I work my way further down. So is this confidential? No, it's more sensitive than that. Well, it must be highly confidential. Actually, it's even more sensitive than that. No, it's part of the Mark 8 project. Click. We're applying the protection. I've got a header. I'm pretty sure I've got a watermark. Yep, there we go. And I'm pretty sure I've got a footer there as well. This document is not only visually marked, but it's also protected in such a way that the protection travels with the document, no matter where it goes, and that only members of the Mark 8 project group in Azure AD have access to this document. So I've got to make a distinction here between access control and permissions. Right? You might end up with this document, but when you double click it, there'll be an authentication prompt. Tell me who you are, and if you're the right person, we're going to send down the decryption keys. You've got to be in this group to have permissions, and this is all configurable, of course, right? So, he's done the right thing, manually apply the protection on this document. I should save it first. Let's do that and give it a name. I'll call this demo.
Probably something while you're doing that as well, Lou, is with those sensitive information types, you can create your own, policy tips. So when a user does highlight one of those labels, you can put in specifically what that label's for. Maybe public is your own personal stuff that doesn't have to be classified at all. There's no sensitive information in there. But project Mark 8, for example, might have a detailed description. This is for a potential project for this particular group. They've got visual representation of what that is while they're applying that label moving forward.
Yeah, don't do what I've done, which is a lazy thing. So I've got the single word personal in here. So Bo's talking about populating that little tooltip there with something really quite prescriptive. We don't want your users having to look up a risk matrix somewhere on a portal to work out what's the right approach sensitivity label should be applying. Build that into the tool. So the documents here on my desktop, fantastic. Typically, from a use case point of view, I might want to save a copy because it's not unusual for people to prefer to work in PDF. And in the past, if I did this, you'd get a pop-up happening here telling me or warning me that you're about to strip all the protection off this document because you're exporting as PDF. That's no longer the case. So when I save this document as PDF, you can see here, I've done a typo on the spelling, but that's okay. Demopalooza.
You can tell we're doing it live this way, Lou. That's the important part.
It's a live Demopalooza. Here we go. So Demopalooza. But what I want to point out is that, yeah, that PDF's come across with all the visual markings, of course, but more importantly, it's actually carried across all those permissions as well. That's protected. This is going to be more relevant later on when we start looking at DLP, especially endpoint DLP, because all the controls that we can afford that Word document are going to apply to that PDF equally. And look, while I'm here, you know, I've got Adobe Acrobat here for those of us who want to work with Adobe Reader. In the past, this was a plugin. I'm going to drag and drop, and I'm going to cross my fingers that Adobe Reader doesn't crash or hang or kill my machine. It's fine. There we go. So without any additional anything in Adobe Reader these days, built into the tool is actually the compatibility with Microsoft Purview Information Protection. We can see the permission details have come across here as well. So once again, you know, it's about that seamless end user experience. We don't want this user to be hitting roadblocks because they're trying to do the right thing in terms of securing content. Just a really quick look here at the email experience as well. So here's Outlook, and very similar sort of experience here in terms of I'm an end user, I've signed into Office 365, and because of who I am, I'm seeing sensitivity labels available to me. And we'll touch on this later on because not everyone's going to see Project Mark 8 as an available option for them. Right, but because I'm in this project team, I get access and I get visibility of this. And the very last thing I'll show you, I might do this in Chrome just to make it feel a little bit more agnostic. Although, why would you use Chrome? Come on.
I think it's worth mentioning that really quickly though as well, is we want to be as agnostic as we can. We're not just focused on protecting just stuff within that's a Microsoft thing, right? We want to protect as much data as we can across the bigger estate that we can. You can see the direction that we are moving in is making that more agnostic. We want to protect everything. We want that single data taxonomy across your organization without having a little bit for us here, a little bit for a vendor here, a little bit for a third-party vendor there. We want to make it so that everything's covered as best we can.
Yeah, perfectly put. And, you know, this is a good chance to actually think about that distinction I'm sort of making here between service side versus device side, user side, client side. That's what I'm looking for. Right. So I've been using the desktop applications on a Windows device. I could have been offline, actually. I don't need internet connectivity for what you just saw. But think in terms of BYOD scenario, different hardware situations, maybe coming from an OS where we're not supported, whatever. But as long as I can get to a browser, in this case, I'm doing it in Chrome, and I'm signed in as a user who's authorized, well, then I can jump in here and actually manage and get access to all my sensitivity labels, and all that functionality, you know, works here as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you've just seen, though, is the idea of manual labeling, where we're giving that end user all the responsibility here, but we can help them out a little bit here with some automatic labeling capabilities here. So I've mentioned, you know, this is a secure document. I don't care, in the Mark 8 project, or regarding the Mark 8 project, clickety click. Now, a couple of things are going to happen in a second. In that text is some sensitive information. And that sensitive information needs to be mapped across to a sensitivity label. And this is a bit of a callback to one of those slides that Bo brought up with the two boxes, the sensitive information, the labels were next to it. So I'm mapping Mark 8 as sensitive information to the appropriate label. We're giving this end user a tooltip, making the suggestion or suggesting they go ahead and do it. What we're actually pointing them to is to that label, and I can either manually jump in. There you go, I did do a tooltip for this one. So they can either manually apply that, or in this case, show me what the problem is with this document. We're making it very clear. It's that phrase, Mark 8. There it is there again. If I click this, we'll actually remove it and replace it with this text. But if I click this option, we're applying the correct label. Tooltip is reflecting that. We're all happy. Everything is secure. End user's gotten a bit of assistance. And all of that, of course, works in the web apps as well. I won't label the point by flipping over, but if I did that in that Chrome interface with a Word document, we get the same tooltip popping up, same sort of behavior, same sort of thing happening in mail as well.
It's probably worth calling out as well, Lou, that you've got the option, right? You can prompt the user to do it. So it's still up to the user to label that document. You can also just have the system label that document when it senses that information. Maybe it's really particularly sensitive PII. You don't want to have the user to have that choice if they've got a document with that in there. You can just automatically say, as soon as that's detected, label that document straight away. So you've got some granular permissions in there as well.
Yeah, so let's play careless, Isaiah, or potentially malicious, and we'll touch on this in subsequent sessions later on. But as you can see here, this is all, you know, customizable depending on the sensitive information we're dealing with. This time around, we're picking up credit card numbers, you know, and they're samples. But the recommendation here is actually all employees confidential. It's a different label. And if I was to jump in here and look at the show sensitive content, it would literally step me through each of these hits and give me that chance to redact. And if I did this all the way through, that would go away. But to your point, Bo, I'm going to ignore it and, you know, do what I want anyway. Let's park this in the back of our mind for later on, because all of these activities, whether I'm accepting these prompts or ignoring them, are being audited, right? So it's important that nothing is missed here. Okay. These are labels that have come from, that we sort of refer to as content-based. Let's put some container-based labels. And am I going to be doing that? Maybe not. Yeah, I think I will actually. Let's do that. Let's do that. First one. Let me do this. I'm going to show you Teams. So Isaiah is part of the Mark 8 project team, as I've mentioned already. There's a Teams channel called Mark 8 Project Team. Within that, there's a team, individual channels here. You might notice here that when I hit this general channel, I've got access to the posts, of course, but when I hit files, we're going to be exposing what is in the back end, of course, which is a SharePoint document library. And you'll notice here a couple of columns. One being sensitivity, the other one being retention label. And as I drill through, we're going to notice something here. Some of these documents actually have a sensitivity label applied, which is great. Not all of them do. We'll talk about how to fix that in a minute. And I guess to make this point even clearer, you know, what we're looking at here is in fact a SharePoint document library. So if I open that up in the back end, I already had it open here. Let's close that one off because I'll confuse myself. Let's move this guy across over there. So I'm now directly in that SharePoint document library. And you'll notice at the very top here, we've got a sensitivity label applied, Project Mark 8. Within these documents, you know, here's one that we've missed. Let me jump in here, select that. We'll jump over here across on the right. So rather than opening the document and hitting that sensitivity label, I can do it directly from this interface. Here's all the labels. I'm seeing them because of who I am and because I'm signed in as Isaiah. And as you can see, eventually, in a couple of seconds, that tab is going to, did I not hit apply? I probably didn't. There we go. Project Mark 8. We've got a good solution in place for actually applying labels either at the client side or here at the server side. We're going to talk about auto labeling a little bit later on, but the use case is actually fixing this problem. If we consider this document library to be that repository of those crown jewels, and my requirement is, you know what, everything in here needs that sensitivity label. And I can't trust my end users to apply it when they're creating this content. So we can build an auto label policy that will label everything here and also everything that ends up in here automatically. Okay. So the other place we see, well, that's actually what I want to do here. Let's flip over the admin console. He says, looking at his notes frantically.
It's a lot to cover. So
Got to keep the flow. Got to keep the flow. And in case you haven't noticed, by the way, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and we have very cold, dark winters. And I think the sun's come out twice today, twice this year, and it just came out 10 minutes ago, and it's been in my eye the whole time here. So let's push on. Compliance.microsoft.com is the landing page for everything Bo and I speak about.
Yeah.
We talked about the platform approach. Everything you need's here. Might look a bit different on your end, but it's all here. And we are specifically today talking about information protection. So the labels that you just saw within those Office applications are built and managed here, the sub-labels, etc. You'll notice there's a couple of extra ones that we didn't see with Isaiah, and that's because I'm not publishing to Isaiah. He's not part of that project, he's part of that project. This is where we build label policies, and label policies dictate who sees what. And the short version is everybody in my organization sees the baseline set of labels, which are these ones. Only members of this project team will see this extra label appended at the end of those baseline labels. And you can keep building this as much as you need to, right? Depending on projects or groups within the organization. So think in terms of that baseline global set that everyone sees, and then add to that as required. What's really interesting here is that if you do this with groups, as you should and will need to, as people move within your organization, if I leave this project team and join a different project team, my menus will automatically update. I'll see Project Obsidian appear all of a sudden, and all these documents with Mark A project are gone, and they're inaccessible to me. Even though I've still got access to the actual documents, I may be locked out of them if that's what your intention is, right?
And that's a pretty common use case as well. Like we've had a lot of customers that when they've started on this, building them out, they've done specific users, and then over time, like any technology, it's not scalable. So make sure you're using groups to manage these moving forward.
Yeah, and it's a good solution for the problem of how do I revoke access after people have moved on, or if they've moved roles. How do I get back this stuff? Do I just trust them that they're going to delete these files? Well, you don't have to. You just move them out of the group, and you've thrown away their decryption keys, basically. I'm going to step through one policy build here, just so we get a sense of how all this is put together. So this is the Mark 8 project label. It's where we define the colors, of course, the scope. And you can see here groups and sites versus items. This is where we talk about how does this label expose itself in these other areas. And I did actually forget to show something here really quickly, because you notice with Teams, when I jump back into that user experience really quickly, when I create a new team as an end user, I actually have access to the labels. And what that means is, built into the label definition we were just looking at, any team with this sensitivity label doesn't allow for guest sharing, etc. So all the controls are built into the label. I don't need to be a Teams admin necessarily to do this stuff. Same thing happens with groups. And again, while we're here, let me just jump in really quickly into Azure. Azure, it's Azure. Too many American accents in my...
Potato, potato.
It's Azure. Oh, money. I got money. Excellent. Let me jump in here into Azure Active Directory. I want to show you some. I thought I have got this set up. I'm sorry.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. Let's jump straight in here. In amongst all my groups, the Mark A project team group. Okay. When we look at the properties of any group, I've got the ability here to apply a label to a group. I've got the ability to apply a label to a team, as we just saw. And I'll show you in a couple of minutes. We can do this at the SharePoint site level as well. I'll show you now. Why not?
Why not?
I did show you that right there. Okay. So what does all that mean? When I come back to my label, here we go. Well, I'm defining, first of all, the scope. So it's going to be visible in all the Office apps. We saw that. Outlook, Teams meetings is a new one as well, right? So the ability within Teams to do things like watermark screen recordings and screen clippings, control who can be invited to a Teams meeting. We just saw this stuff. And this is the other Purview stuff that Bo mentioned earlier on as well. So one label exposing itself in multiple places. Again, think back to those slides. Tell me about what's in this label. This label is going to apply encryption. It's also going to do visual marking. So I'm not doing anything with Teams meetings at the moment here. So what permissions are afforded by the application of this label? Well, this is going to give members of that team, or that group, I should say, down here, co-author permission. We can do multiple additions here and add multiple groups, and for each of them, we can jump in here and say, well, that group gets co-author, but this group's going to get reviewer, that group's only going to have view access, and I don't know, we're going to dial up something custom here. And the custom option might be a group who's got every permission except for the ability to remove the label. All right, they can never remove the label.
I think it's good to highlight there as well. Like, we talk a lot about preventing printing and stuff like that. That is the area where you prevent certain groups from doing things like printing, forwarding an email, sharing it externally, that sort of thing. That's where you do it.
Absolutely. Clicking through, this is where we set up all the visual markings that you saw. This is where we set up the auto labeling. So this is literally, without drilling in too far, I've got a sensitive information type that's just a dictionary of terms. Mark 8 with no space, all the variations. And if I see this in a document, then I'm going to recommend the users apply. I could have done it automatically and give them some custom text. And you saw that nice yellow tooltip for this option. If I apply this to a group, we saw this in Azure AD. What does that sensitivity label do to a group? Well, it's going to control level of access. It's going to control conditional access here as well. And we can also apply this to channel meetings. So this is where we have those controls over groups and SharePoint sites, etc. And when I click through, now we're getting into the details. Sorry, I was talking over myself there a little bit. We're setting up the scope here. This is where the detail is. That's why I was going blank. So when we're applying this to a team or a group, it's going to make that team or group private. And we saw that when I tried to create a new Teams channel. All the sharing options were grayed out, right? When it comes to external sharing, and this blows me away. So if I've got a SharePoint site and I want to do things like make sure there's no external access to the SharePoint site and that you have to be on a fully managed device to have access, but it's read-only for everybody else. That would have meant a trip into Azure AD, conditional access, build the policy. We can do that with a label now, right? So this control I've got set up here literally means I've got that conditional access control set up just by applying the label itself. I'm not doing anything here with the data assets view, and finish. So if it's been a while since you've last looked at sensitivity labeling, you may realize there's a lot more steps in that wizard than there used to be. And that's an indication of how much more control we've got compared to where we were before.
It's probably worth calling out on this screen as well is you can see the order of priority in sensitivity from the lowest to the highest. Obviously, Project Mark 8 in this, that is our highest priority. That is our maximum sensitivity that we've got in the organization, whereas personal is less. So if you've got a situation where maybe 2 labels would apply to a document, it's always going to inherit the most confidential, the highest classification that it can.
Yeah, that's also going to kick in when you do things like downgrading, right?
Yeah.
So I'm downgrading. Let's try that again. I possibly don't have the policy set up. I had to have one fluff in the demo. Okay,
yeah,
I don't have the policy set up, but you could set up a downgrade policy whereby you need to provide justification if you're going to downgrade. I haven't got that set up in this demo tenant.
You'll be able to see some of that when we do the DLP stuff next month anyway, because you've also got the option to do like a user override. So it looks the same.
Indeed. So I want to call back to that situation, and I'll go back here very quickly just to give us a quick view here of the problem, which we're trying to fix, which is this. I've got a, actually let's jump in here. Let's make this real, okay? I'm okay with this, but when it comes to our research and development documents, the crown jewels of the organization, the stuff that we, you know, live and die by, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing, which is in this column. I've got a lot of stuff in here without the correct sensitivity label. And yes, I could click through each individual one as you saw me do and apply that, but there is a better way. And the better way is to do it on behalf of the end users with auto labeling. So I'm going to step through a policy here, just to give you a view of the options, and then talk about at the outcome why I would encourage you to give this a shot, even if you feel scared and you're risk averse, and you've got really strict change control and etc. etc. I'll come back to this screen in a minute. So the policy, I want an auto labeling policy for that stuff that we were just looking at. SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business. Admin units, I'm not fussed about. This is a way of scoping out the administrators to manage different parts of the business. Doesn't apply here. We might touch on this in another session further down the track. What's the scope of this label? I want you to hit SharePoint and OneDrive and find stuff that needs to be labeled and do it for me at the service end, right? When it comes to SharePoint, I've got a policy here that's looking for anything that contains anything of that sensitive information type, and we can drill in. It's a very straightforward wizard. What am I looking for? Stuff that matches this. You know, when I click add, this is my big scrolling list of all those sensitive information types. Lots of these are built in.
It's probably worth calling out there as well. You can create your own sensitive information types. You're not limited to the 316 that we offer you out of the box. You can tailor them. You can create your own. If you've got unique data to your organization, make a sensitive information type, train it, and then start putting it in policies and see where it lands.
Lots of flexibility, lots of flexibility. But the aim here is I'm looking for this sensitive information within SharePoint. In this case, I'm doing exactly the same thing within OneDrive. And then the question remains, well, if I find this stuff, what do I do about it? And what I do about it is add or apply that label, okay? And this is the scary bit, because if I run this and make a mistake, I'm going to be labeling content, potentially locking people out. And the way we mitigate that fear is we run this policy in simulation mode. Okay, so what does that mean? I'm going to click cancel because I've already done this, of course. We are running this policy in simulation mode. Just flip back right here. You'll notice that I've got a lot of policies running in simulation. It's actually only one live policy in my entire organization, but this one is running in simulation. And what it's telling me is that if this was real, if this was live, it would have crawled through and applied labels to the following files. And eventually when this screen comes up, and it will, here we go, it's telling me there are 14 matching files here that are ready to review. Let me have a look. So this would step me through all the files in SharePoint, OneDrive. You know, these are the files that we were just looking at actually for the most part. And for each of these files, I can do a quick visual check. Is my policy correct? Are my sensitive information types correct? Are we happy with, I don't know why it does this little wiggle thing, but there you go. It pulls out, you know, that's what I found, right? And there's the context of that sensitive information type within the document. I'm looking at this thinking that's pretty good. That's what I'm looking for. You know, source will give me a bit of a visual of the document itself, but I find this a bit quicker. Just show me the stuff. And when I'm confident that, yes, that's bugging me. When I'm confident that, yes, this is tuned to where I need it, I turn on the policy and only then turn on the policy. If I need to tune something, I'll jump back in, update the policy, restart the simulation, review this in a week or so, and then keep going until I'm happy, and then eventually turn on the policy, and that policy goes live. And that problem we were just looking at, I'll flip back quickly, this problem then goes away, because with that live policy, it's going to crawl through and apply that label to all these files as required. So let's wrap up. There's a lot happening here, a lot of activity, I should say. Some of it's manual, some of it's automatic, some of it's just discovery based. When I come back into the admin console here, and we'll flip back all the way. Hey, let's do a quick refresh. I'll reload that. And let me do it here as well. And I'm back at compliance.microsoft.com. And we've been sort of working through these options, but I want to jump all the way back up to the top here to the data classification node, because there's two areas we need to look at. The first one is Content Explorer. And if you think back to those circles that Bo was talking about, we've got discovery in there, right? So where is this stuff? And if I do a quick look at Project Mark 8, I can see I've got 23 hits on sensitive files, and I've got 22 files with a label on it. And that may or may not be a good thing. There's the spread across where that sensitive information has been found. There's the spread of where the files are with the appropriate labels. Okay, and that's great. The next question is, well, who's been doing what? How do we get to that? And that's what Activity Explorer is about. Activity Explorer builds on auditing. There's a lot of this capability within the Purview stack, and there's a lot of ways of extracting this information. This is one of them. So don't feel like, you know, there's limitations here, or maybe this won't do what I need to. We're going to cover all the other ways of doing this sort of thing. But what I love about Activity Explorer is its immediacy. Look at this activity. There was a label changed when? Oh, just a few minutes ago. How did that label change? It was done manually. What's the name of the file? It's this file, one of the ones that Lou can't spell. Who was the user? It's a spreadsheet. Excellent. What's the label? What was the old label? So basically, I just flip the labels back and forth. So it's not an upgrade nor downgrade. Where is that file? You get the idea. Here's another example. This was a label upgrade. Okay, excellent. This time we went from nothing all the way up to this label. Excellent. Here are the recommendations. There was a recommendation. We recommended that label get applied. Where was that recommendation? We weren't in a browser. It was on the endpoint.
It's probably good to note there as well, Lou, you can filter these activities. So in an actual production
100%.
tenant, there's got to be thousands, millions, loads and loads and loads of these. If you care about labels, filter for labels.
Yep. And you can see here on the right-hand side, we've got these columns as well. And one of the built-in filters that I find really useful is this one right here. Just get me to the stuff I care about. Who's messing about with labels? I need to see upgrades, downgrades. You might be doing this simply for the sake of trying to understand whether your training is working.
Yep.
You could be an organization is rolling out manual labeling, and you want to see, well, we've done a week's worth of training, and I expect the week after to see a lot of labeling activity, and this will either confirm that that's happening or tell you that, hey, we need to go back and train people up because they're not doing it. But, you know, that filtering has been done here as well, which is quite handy. So, Bo, I'm going to stop sharing because I think we've covered a lot. And even with this session, we've kind of rushed because there's so much to talk about. We could do a week on this topic on its own, and we need to leave room for more. So, look, the aim in this session was to give you a sense of the first area that covers those 4 quadrants that Bo was talking about earlier and showing us earlier. We're starting with information protection because it's kind of foundational as well. Yeah. Those labels, the sensitive information types, they surface in lots of places that we're going to touch on in subsequent sessions. And wanted to give you a sense of, or we wanted to give you a sense of user experience and admin experience as well. You know, what's the impact of what we're building in the console? And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Bo, to wrap up because my voice is about to go.
You've done well. It's been like an hour. So we're looking at doing this sort of more long form content compared to how we were doing it before as well, right? So hopefully that's provided a clear picture on some of the information protection capabilities that we do offer in the Purview suite. And you can look forward to this kind of format moving forward. So next episode, we're looking at covering data loss prevention. So you'll have the same sort of thing, user experience, some admin perspective, how we look at approaching it from the technology perspective, and you can see how some of those policies are configured. So thank you very much for joining us and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.